He's not killing kids right now. He's being William Afton the father, so he's the yellow guy.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Rye Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. I didn't almost forget my intro. You did. But we're going to go into an Oops All Questions episode. I wasn't really sure what kind of topic I wanted to cover today. So I just figured I'd put up a bunch of questions and we'll try to knock them out because the email is pretty backlogged. So it seems good to do so. I don't think I'll ever catch up on this backlog, but I'll sure try. If you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them in to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description to copy and paste because it's pain to type out. Our first question comes from Kit, him. I bought the official FNAF Secret of the Mimic calendar, and as I was flicking through the pages, something stood out. Each month has a character and a collage of images related to that character. Example, Big Top has the Big Top Showroom, the Shooting Gallery, and other games. And February in particular stood out to me, as the character was Chica, and the collage behind them included Mystic Hippo sign and a Fall Fest poster, which struck me as odd as far as I know, there's no direct connection between her and Fall Fest. Thank you for your question, Kit. So, a couple things. Immediately, I didn't even know there was a Secret of the Mimic calendar. But when I read this question, I was like, all right, well, let me go look up Secret of the Mimic calendar official. And wouldn't you know it, when you Google that, but when you look it up, there is a publisher, and I noted specifically, I could only find one in the UK, so maybe that's why I haven't heard of this. But there's a publisher called Danilo Promotions who makes officially licensed calendars, and they do have a Secret of the Mimic calendar. Luckily, the Amazon listing allows me to see every single picture here, because if I'm looking through it, I wanted to immediately notice the trend. I will say, I look at the February, and you're right, looking at the February page, you have Chica with Mystic Hippo and it's hard to tell on the image. It looks like a Fall Fest certificate almost. And that Fall Fest certificate, as far as I'm aware, is the only time it shows up in the entire calendar, from what I can see. The Mystic Hippo poster does show up another time, but that Fall Fest, very clearly, big bold letters, Fall Fest. It's only behind Chica. That is interesting. So it's one of those things where I have to look at this and we go, okay, it's officially licensed. We shouldn't, I would say generally shouldn't use these as primary sources. But this is kind of like the FNAF bag of secondary sources is looking at things like this, where you have these extraneous media. And if it's being approved by Scott, then, seemingly Scott's okay with it. So let's look at what it is. And you're right, we have all these characters. We have Big Top, we have Chica, I don't know the names of half of these ones. Be on a Swing. We have Nurse Dolly. We have a Mycelium Man. Oh, I knew this poodle's name. We have the poodle. We have the White Tiger plush. We have Mr. Helpful. We have Hudgy the Hedgehog. Jackie, the Party Dog Thing, and a Cleanovac. We're standing up because I yawned twice. Anyway. You look at this poster and immediately, most of it can be disregarded because, look, is there meaningful lore behind all of the random costumes of Murray's Costume Manor? I would say no. I would say the majority of the costumes just kind of exist to fill out the roster. But the important ones to talk about, definitely, Big Top is important. The White Tiger is important. Nurse Dolly is important. Jackie could be important. And definitely Chica is important, right? Possibly Mr. Helpful, but we kind of already know his deal. We look at all of these. Wait. Okay, Colaroni. Okay. There's something. I just noticed something behind Mr. Helpful, but it was just a Colaroni. Big Top makes sense. Out the gate we have, and not only is it Shooting Gallery and the Big Top Showroom sign, but we just have, actually, we have corroborating evidence for Chica. Because I think that is one of the... It is. Okay, so there's this Chica's Party World poster where it's the 2D art. And we have Chica in the front, and then we have a cupcake, a burger. I thought was a soda, but I guess is chicken. Which we're not going to talk about. And a milkshake. Yeah, that's chicken. Notably, on the big top poster is an image of Chica's chicken, the like little chicken bucket guy. It looks like there might be a name, but my image, I don't know if there's any way to make this image bigger, and the quality is pretty low. I was able to zoom in a little bit. I think it's literally Mr. Chicken. It's hard to read, but you know, Big Top is very Fall Fest coded. Do we know Big Top was at Fall Fest? No. But he's literally like the carnival guy, so it would make sense. Or at least he was planned to be added to Fall Fest. So now we not only have that, but we again have Chica with the Fall Fest image. And now Big Top being associated with Chica's extra stuff. To be fair, and just so we're not going too crazy here, that's important. But what's also important is to look at all the characters. And, you know, a character like Hedgehog Hudgy, or Hudgy the Hedgehog, or whatever his name is, who ostensibly doesn't really matter, is just a roster filler, probably has no lore relevance. He has the milkshake Chica friend behind him. And Mystic Hippo, frankly, has enough information that he's just as relevant towards Fall Fest as the other two characters we've mentioned so far. And he doesn't fucking matter. You look at the poodle, Sharpay, I believe was the poodle's name, now that I'm thinking about it. The burger is behind Sharpay. You look at the bee on the swing, the cupcake is behind the bee on the swing. So, like, what is this telling us? I think if we are to take anything from this, it's not necessarily like, wait, there's two Fall Fest things behind Chica. It's that all of these characters are connected, and many of them have links to Fall Fest. I wouldn't doubt if Fall Fest was just like the biggest client that Murray's Costume Manor had. And they constantly sold suits over to Fall Fest to go and do Fall Fest stuff, you know, and that would, or I wouldn't even doubt if Fall Fest was owned by Murray's Costume Manor, because what we see in Help Wanted 2 is that there is a very heavy emphasis on the Fazbear characters at Fall Fest. We, you know, everything we get from the Help Wanted 2 claw machine, the background of it is Fall Fest with the FNAF characters performing on it. So I wouldn't doubt if Murray's Costume Manor owned Fall Fest, or at least was the major owner of it. Because, in that sense, when Murray's Costume Manor goes under and Fazbear buys it up, they would also be inheriting Fall Fest. But also consider they'd been collaborating for quite some time, so those Fazbear characters showing up at Fall Fest doesn't make, like, it makes sense for that to happen. The interesting thing, though, that we have to keep in mind is that this place was 1979. The fire of Fall Fest had to have happened several years prior, because it, you know, kills a character who's dead by the time the game happens, and we have these logs of things that happened after her death. So it is one of those things to think about, that, like, on one hand, yes, it makes sense for all these characters to be owned by Murray's Costume Manor, because Murray's Costume Manor owns Fall Fest. I think this line of thinking could explain why Fall Fest started back up after the fact, because we have that one sign in Help Wanted of Fall Fest 83, and we have the other poster of Fall Fest 1970. So the question was that a continuous run? Well, we know Fall Fest opened at least by 1970, and that a fire killed Fiona at some point after, and that, you know, by the time of 1979, the Fall Fest isn't happening anymore, because, you know, we have no information of it at all. But we do know that by 1983, you know, unless Help Wanted is lying, which is possible, but we can assume, if it's not lying, by 1983, Fall Fest was a thing again. And at this point in the timeline, Fazbear would fully own Murray's Costume Manor and all of its subsidiaries. So it would track if that gap is the before and the after. That gap is, after the fire, Murray's costume manor stopped holding Fall Fest. It was too traumatic for Edwin Murray to want to do it. It was too dangerous in the public eye. It didn't make sense. But once Fazbear got their greedy little hands on everything, they don't really care about their public image. They're like, sure, Fall Fest, it burned down that one time, but we're not Murray's costume manor. We won't burn it down. Who cares who's right or wrong? I think that does go a good way to explain the look of some of the snippets of Fall Fest we've gotten as well. If we are to assume that the Fall Fest parts we see in Help Wanted are Fazbear's Fall Fest, and the Fall Fest bits we see in Help Wanted 2 is Murray's Costume Manor Fall Fest, that does kind of track, right? Like, what do we see in the Fall Fest minigames of Help Wanted? We have trick-or-treating with Fazbear masks. We have Build a Mangle. We have, a FNAF 4 recreation. We have Circus Baby masks, a Foxy Dark Rooms ride. We have a maze with, Fazbear branding on it. This makes sense. Then we go to Help Wanted 2, where we get Fall Fest still. And there is Fazbear branding. But a bit toned down, right? We have the carousel or not toned down, a bit older. It feels older, right? We have the Fazzer Blast, which is just like a shooting gallery. We have the carousel, which is, an older, like one of the oldest kinds of fair fun. What else do we have Fall Fest from Help Wanted? I mean, there's Mystic Hippo for one. So we have, it really does give the vibe that the snippets of Fall Fest we're seeing in Help Wanted 2 are Murray's Costume Manor's Fall Fest, where the snippets of Fall Fest we're seeing in Help Wanted 1 is Fazbear's. So to wrap this back to your initial question, is this calendar meaningfully telling us about Chica's role in Fall Fest? I'm going to say probably no. But what I think this is good information and like a decent supporting evidence for is that Murray's Costume Manor was renting out pretty much all of its costumes for Fall Fest, including Chica, including Big Top, including all of these no-names, including the White Tiger plushie. This was stuff that was being used for Fall Fest until it burned down. And then they stopped Fall Fest. We have no idea the exact years Fall Fest ran, but I really heavily doubt that Edwin Murray was gung-ho about doing Fall Fest the next year when his wife died the year before. And we have plenty of time until 1983 when Fazbear would have bought up the brand again. So, all in all, I think if anything, if you want to glean any lore from this calendar, it's that all of these characters were at Fall Fest, not just Chica. But also take it with a grain of salt. It is it's officially licensed. It is most likely a third party who is making this calendar, and they showed it to Scott and Steelwool for the people who hold the characters and all that, and they went, yeah, it looks good. And they shipped it. They're not gonna be able to hand pick and hand approve every single piece of merchandise that goes out there. So I would say it's decent supporting evidence to suggest that all the animatronics were at Fall Fest. I wouldn't look too further into it. But thank you for your question. Our next one comes from Casey, any all. I have an affinity for Jester characters. Marx is my favorite Kirby character, and I have a Jevil plush resting on my bed. So you can imagine how I'd feel when people were starting to suggest that the prototype, this is about Poppy Playtime, could be a Jester. And looking into it, I found some promising pieces of information. One, in Mob Entertainment's Christmas 2025 illustration, there is a painting of a Jester character, holding a red bag on a stick in one hand and a poppy in the other. Its outfit is covered in the Playtime Co. colors. The Playtime Co. building is also in the background. Number two, in the teaser image Mob gave us for New Year's, you can see just past the prototype's hand, if you brighten the image, where it has segmented sleeves just like the Jester from the painting. Number three, during the build-up for Chapter 4, some people were able to find a Jester when combining some images. While I like the idea of the prototype taking the form of a Jester, there's another aspect I see in this. What if the prototype represents a fool rather than a Jester? What meaning would there be if the prototype represents the fool in a deck of tarot cards? For the record, I don't know shit about tarot cards. LMAO. Well, for the record, you asked the right people. My wife reads tarot all the fucking time, and I know a bit about it just from being married to her. To the point that I went and grabbed her book for it. Surprise. But yeah, so first of all, before we get into the tarot interpretations of everything, straight up, everything that's been stated is true. That, Poppy Playtime, or Mob Entertainment specifically, released a version of the Fool, but in the Playtime colors, holding a poppy flower. And in the teaser out of nowhere that we got that shows off the legs of the prototype and a hand, it's worth noting that not only are those sleeves the right color, but the prototype in that image is holding a poppy flower, which is exactly what the Fool is doing in the painting we have. So, yeah, I think the core of the prototype is going to resemble this Fool. I think that was a teaser that we didn't pick up on until we got this secondary teaser. Now, what will that look like? Is it going to be, a human on stilts? I don't think so. I think what makes the most sense is the spider-like legs we've been seeing with some sort of central body, extended arms, and then, maybe looking at the Fool design we have, it's got one hat, it's got a tri-piece hat where it's one coming up and two coming down. That could very easily be translated into some sort of monster design. I'm very excited for it if that's the case. But, to go on to Fool, I borrowed a book, and funny enough, look at that, that's the Fool. But let's get into the actual meaning of this, right? Now, to be clear, I'm not going to profess to be an expert here or anything like that, but something to be clear is that tarot is very intuitive, and it's very, reading tarot has always been seen as a very, it's not an exact science, right? It's something that most of the associated and traditional meanings for tarot are kind of like jumping off points for meaning. But, when used in fiction like this, we can pretty readily assume they mean to be referencing traditional interpretations of that tarot card, right? Like, we're not actually trying to predict anything, or like, we're not trying to use this for any sort of reading. We're just, they are invoking imagery. How is that imagery typically seen? Well, let's read, from, I'm just going to read directly from this book. I think it'll be useful. This is the Tarot, No Questions Asked, Master the Art of Intuitive Reading by Teresa Reed. This book. To quote directly from the book, the Fool card. Skipping ahead a little bit. This card symbolizes a new phase in life, a journey, risk, and innocence. It's a sign that you now must take a brave leap of faith, even if you're not sure where you will land. Instead, remain open to what's ahead and trust that this path may lead you in exciting new directions. The Fool always walks where The Fool always walks where angels fear to tread. Other ways of looking at this card is living in the moment, taking a new routine, a spiritual journey, innocence, lack of worldly experience, trusting in the goodness of the universe, a minimalist lifestyle, doing what's totally unfamiliar, the beginner's mind. So, when I look at this, and we see that Mob Entertainment is directly making a parallel with the prototype and the Fool, to me, I see this as possibly some of the best evidence that the prototype is Elliot Ludwig that I've seen so far. Because I've been very against Elliot Ludwig, the owner, runner of Playtime Co., being the prototype for a while, just because I didn't really see it lining up. But if the Fool truly is this representation of new beginnings, innocence, taking a leap of faith, I can totally see the prototype's origin being Elliot Ludwig in the pursuit of creating these bigger bodies, creating this larger than life. We've transcended humanity. This is an amazing thing we can do. And now children can live forever. We can all live forever. We've solved death, the worst thing that can happen. I can bring my daughter back. Taking that innocent first leap of faith. Obviously, it went wrong, but a new beginning. That makes sense. I totally see that. And we look at with the fact that it's decked out fully in Playtime Co. colors. It's in front of the Playtime Co. building. The only thing I can think of that might be weird about this, Elliot, do we have a picture of Elliot Ludwig? I don't think so. Do we know what he looks like? Well, apparently there's a newspaper photo where you can kind of see the top of his head, and it's like kind of shiny. We don't know if he's blonde is the thing, because it's notable. If the Fool's interpretation, typically has blonde hair in it, but it is, they changed so much of it. I would think if we know a character who is blonde who could be the prototype, that'd be a shoo-in. But I could see being Elliot Ludwig for that reason. I could also see the argument that it is Rich, our character who we've seen the entire side arc. Like, there's kind of a concurrent plot of the tapes of Poppy Playtime where Rich is like going throughout the company, and he seems to like have some anger issues, but he's genuinely trying to do the right thing, and he notices there's some fucked up stuff going on with Playtime Go. So it could be Rich as well, and I think this interpretation does also go for Rich too. The idea of, innocence, new beginnings, trying to take a leap of faith, the idea of Rich trying to do the right thing and trying to step in, but instead being turned into the prototype. And we know that somewhere in the prototype, notwithstanding now, at this point in the timeline, he seems to be pretty ruthless. But, at some point, the prototype did care for the children. We don't know if he still does. But at some point, he did definitively. Because there's the story you can piece together about Catnap's child, where, the prototype was trying to escape and was talking to the child who eventually becomes Catnap and like promising all this stuff and just, I'll help, blah, 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 blah. You just need to help let me out. And it finally, the child finally relents and helps the prototype with this plan, and it works, and it opens a way to leave. But in doing so, that child is horribly electrocuted and will die if doctors do not intervene. And the prototype brings that kid to the staff's attention, which they end up being able to save him and turn him into Catnap to keep him alive and capture the prototype in doing so. So the prototype could have had its freedom, but it willingly gave up its freedom to save the child that helped it. So I think it is important to note that it seems like at some point in the timeline, the prototype did genuinely care about the children. And we get some other hints that it might still, but it's doing it in the wrong way. Where we have the tape with Mrs. Delightful, the hot teacher one, where she's talking about the fact that that she can't find the kids, and she talks to a voice, I assume it's the prototype, where it's like, are the kids safe? Yes. Can I see them? No. She was like, probably because I'd kill them all. Like, prototype is actively protecting the children from long gone toys like Mrs. Delight. And then we get the tape at the end of, or the receiver for that tape at the very end of the most recent chapter, where we hear the prototype and the doctor having an argument where essentially the doctor is failing his end of a bargain. He's trying to do something that the prototype pretty much is like, you need to do this. We don't have time. You need to do this. And the doctor's like, hey, everyone failed at this, and I'm just one guy. I will need time. So, and I would not doubt if that, whatever this was, is continuing the initial experiment. Can we truly save a child? So that does kind of go back to Elliot, but it could be Rich too. Could we can we undo the toy process? Can we turn them back into a human? If so, then it could be Rich, But I could really see that Elliot Ludwig is still, it's kind of like if Will Care was real and well written. where where it's literally like Elliot Ludwig does truly love his daughter Poppy and is willing to raise the earth and burn it all to the ground in order to save her. I could see that too. There's a lot of ways to interpret the prototype being directly correlated with the fool. That's really interesting. So thank you for bringing that up, Casey. Our next question comes from Palmer, him. I believe that the reason why William Afton is depicted as Purple Guy is because of the agony attached to him. In Midnight Motorist, he's still yet to kill anyone, so he's orange. Once he locks Michael in the testing chamber, he torments his son, then he becomes purple. Also, when Michael is scooped and Ennard enters his body, he becomes purple because the agony from the dead kids are latching onto him. Please take my theory with a grain of salt. I don't know much about how agony works. Thank you for your question. Agony's weird. Now, the shitty part about agony is I can't definitively say you're wrong, because we know fuck all about agony as a collective just with the information we have. But as far as we're aware, agony is more of a pitch black than a purple. It would be your Shadow Bonnie instead of your Shadow Freddy. However, in pixel art, especially with black backgrounds, we can't do that. I wouldn't necessarily say the purple of William Afton is because he's got agony on him. I think the simplest solution is often the correct one in situations like this. He's often in the dark. He's very often in the dark. What happens in the shadows is misconstrued in the mind of a child. But also, I think there is a deliberate choice of using purple and yellow/orange on William Afton. And I think it is the difference between the facade he fronts and his true nature. Yellow being the facade he fronts, purple being his true nature. I think I've pointed this up before. I think one of the best and clearest examples of it is actually in the first FNAF movie, where when we first meet William Afton, he's Steve Raglan, and he's got a nice yellow shirt with a purple tie, a nice yellow over, and a nice purple center. And we see in FNAF 6 the Fruity Maze cutscene, where, in the Spring Bonnie suit, his text keeps flickering between yellow and purple. He's still Spring Bonnie. He's talking to her as Spring Bonnie, his facade. But that sickly inside is seeping through, knowing that he'll soon be able to kill another child. And as far as Midnight Motors goes, he's not killing kids right now. He's being William Afton the father, so he's the yellow guy. Or orange or mustard, or whatever you say. I would argue the color is much more metaphorical than that. I would also argue, and I have no way of proving this. Scott would need to come out and directly confirm it. There's no way to possibly prove this. I would bet a lot of money that William Afton was originally made purple because he's a dark and shady figure on a black background. And then purple kind of stuck. That's my guess anyway. But regardless, thank you for your question, Palmer. Our next one comes from Setri, she, her. Hey, Ryan, I wanted to pick your brain regarding a topic a friend and I were discussing. She noticed that Circus Baby is the only animatronic whose eyes seem to have changed in response to being possessed. The question being, why didn't that happen with any other animatronic? Sure, there's the doylist answer of it just being a cool thing Scott thought for Baby and didn't sweat the wider details of it, but maybe there's more diegetic explanation to be had. I would say there is one, because Elizabeth and Circus Baby are rather unique in Five Nights at Freddy's, in the sense that she's really the only example of a direct possession of an animatronic without any assistance. So let's talk about the MCI. Right, in the MCI, the victims possess their suits, and it seems like Charlotte is the one to help them do that. They do not do that on their own volition. Charlotte never helps Elizabeth Afton, so it can be assumed that she possesses Circus Baby of her own volition. She just does that. I cannot think of a single animatronic in this franchise that is possessed where a child dies and chooses to possess that thing without any outside help. So I would argue that if you want a diegetic explanation for why that is, why the eye color change happens, it's that. It's the idea that in possessing Circus Baby, Elizabeth Afton affected it physically with how strong her connection to Circus Baby is. There's that too. We have no idea how connected the MCI kids were to the Fazbear animatronics, but we know for a fact that Elizabeth Afton was obsessed with Circus Baby. She was convinced it was made for her. All she wanted to do was play with it. So the idea that she dies inside of it, and she had this thought where Circus Baby was made for me. Her connection to Circus Baby being so strong that it changes the physical appearance of Circus Baby, I think with that in mind, does make sense. So, to your question, frankly, it might be, I would say it's like 60-40 likely, like 60% likely that it was just a cool idea Scott had and didn't think about the repercussions. But there is a chance that it was on purpose. And I think this would be the best explanation why. Thank you for your question. We'll do one more, I think, because we're getting close. I'm tired, frankly. We're like, I want to say on the recording around a half hour 40, but I'm pretty beat. So we'll just do one more. Our last question comes from Zovra, they. We often pair Shadow Freddy and Bonnie in lore discussions, since they both came from the same game. But I find it interesting that Shadow Freddy was never given a name, the same way Shadow Bonnie, even Shadow Dee Dee, were. On top of him having a distinctly different color to him, purple versus the black monochrome, maybe we're not really supposed to be lumping Shadow Freddy in with the other shadows. Thank you for your question. I could not agree with you more. Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are incredibly different in weird ways that don't quite make sense. Because Shadow Bonnie, I think the more you think about him and the more you consider when he pops up, he starts to make more sense. Whereas I cannot really say the same about Shadow Freddy. Shadow Freddy just doesn't really make sense to me. He's a weird guy. I have in the past made the argument that Shadow Freddy is the Agony reflection of Cassidy, and Shadow Bonnie is the Agony reflection of Charlotte. I really like that theory. It's admittedly kind of weak evidence-wise, but narratively, I think it's really satisfying and explains their continued roles in the games as they go forward. But again, you're right to say that Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Dee Dee get proper names. Shadow Freddy doesn't. Shadow Freddy is still the fan name we've given it. And a Purple Freddy, as far as we're aware, has only showed up twice ever. FNAF 2 location and Follow Me. As the thing we're following in Follow Me. And this came out right after FNAF 2. So that needs to be on purpose. He didn't forget that he made Shadow Freddy and then the next game made a different Purple Freddy. So the question is, what is it? Well, if I had to guess, I would maybe argue that Shadow Freddy is a hallucination given to us by the spirits there of a spare Springlock suit that William Afton used to lure the animatronics to the back room. Is that true? Probably not. I don't think so. I think I'm spitballing here at best. But it is worthwhile to mention that in FNAF 1, the movie, we do see a Purple Freddy suit that can fit a human being in it. So who knows? It's possible. No, Shadow Freddy's a weird one. He doesn't look like any other Agony thing we know about. He doesn't get a proper name, but he does show up there, and he does show up in FNAF World. I'm pretty sure. Is Shadow Freddy? Yeah, Shadow Freddy's in FNAF World. That's the one, Shadow Freddy. I bring this up in the theory of, Shadow Freddy being Cassidy's reflection and Shadow Bonnie being Charlotte's reflection. It's interesting that Shadow Freddy's, all of his attacks are one hits. It's Unscrew, that has a 33% chance to instantly kill an enemy. Escape Key, which grants a possible instant kill attack with a lower chance than Unscrew. And Water Hose, which is an attack that kills all enemies under 30% health. It's a very, aggressive build. It is a instant kill build. Whereas Shadow Bonnie, or, RWQFSFASXC, can't attack directly. Shadow Bonnie gets Haunting, a yellow attack that turns enemies into stone. Mimic Ball, a yellow attack that mimics every other move. And Gift Boxes, a yellow attack that revives / gives the party an extra life. Isn't that interesting that Shadow Bonnie gives gifts to give life. Again, like, I do really like this theory, just the idea is loose at best. And I don't want to think about the repercussions, about the fact that Shadow Bonnie knows Mimic Ball. We're not going to bring that up right now. No, I think you're right to say that they are very different. But at the same time, this is FNAF 2, where a lot of what Scott was doing was still pretty inconsistent. So if we get a Shadow Freddy in the future that's full black, I'm more than willing to just assume it's the same character, you know? But yeah, thank you for your question. I hope that answered it. Again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. Send the description, copy, and paste because it's pain to type out. But until next time, as always, you've been watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.